Welcome to Porch Play Chats, sponsored by the American Association for the Child's Right to Play, or more affectionately titled IPA USA. IPA USA is a USA affiliate of the International Play Association, and as part of our efforts to support play, we've introduced Porch Play Chats, which are conversations with people who are just as passionate about play as we are. You can find almost 300 Porch Play Chats free to you by going to the IPAUSA.org website, and up in that top right-hand corner, subscribing to YouTube, following us on Instagram, friending us on Facebook. And if you're into podcasts, you can sign up for a free podcast account, and you can get many of the Porch Play Chats are being uploaded a few at a time on Spotify. I'm Deb Lawrence, and I'm president of IPA USA, and with me on the porch today is Heather Bernt Santy. Hi, Heather.
Hello.
For over 30 years, Heather, she's just a small chicken, just a young chick, right? For over 30 years, Heather Bernt Santy, who has her master's in education, has been living her commitment to children, their families, and their teachers. You may know Heather from her work as the host of the popular early care and education podcast, That Early Childhood Nerd, which I love. I love that one. But she also loves her work as a speaker, consultant, writer, and professor. And she is getting ready to publish a book, which each of you will want to get. Held just about every possible position in the field of early childhood as a teacher, a director, a family child care provider, an education director, and now a professor. And I think one of the things that I love about Heather is her common sense and research-based approach about why play is the right way for children to develop. And that, I think, is the most amazing piece.
Yeah. So, it's a perfect matching of my two biggest personality traits, which are being kind of a nerd and being kind of a goofball.
Which is so perfect, which is why I love our conversations. So Heather's going to talk to us about an observation she was doing in a classroom with a little boy, and what this little boy did and what this little boy was learning. Because sometimes, we're all about, using the materials correctly, even when young children may be needing to experiment and try something. So let's do it.
Yeah, so this is an observation, comes from an observation that I did as part of my research for the book that's coming out in fall of 2025, which is about using schema play as like a lens or a framework to advocate for more play, for more free play. And so I was in a classroom of 3 and 4-year-olds and just kind of hanging back and observing. And I got to watch this little boy who was older 3, younger 4. I'm not sure. And I was just telling you this before we started recording, Deb. He's one of those that probably got into some trouble a lot because everyone in the space, including the other children, used his full name instead of just his first name. And you know how that kind of is an indicator that someone has been called out a lot. So his name was Warren, and he wanted to he was trying to climb into one of the squares in a shelving unit. And it was, I'm not good at measurement, but maybe 18 by 18 inches. Like, it wasn't a big space.
And he's big. He's 3.5, 4, right?
He was a big boy, and he really just wanted to get his body in there. And I think it probably started as him just being funny, but then it became like really challenging for him. And he started by kind of leaning in and with his head going in first and then trying to bring his body in. And of course he didn't fit that way. And so he kind of turned sideways and tried to bring his legs in and still wasn't quite working. And he just kept problem solving, kept trying new things to get his body into this space. So it was like an enclosing and enveloping schema.
Schema.
And then pretty soon other children were watching him do this too. And he would look at me and he would laugh and then he'd try his next idea. And you could see the other children who were watching him kind of look at the classroom teacher like, are you going to stop this? Are you really letting this happen? And I think that she only probably let it happen because I was there observing. Otherwise, I think probably this would have been frowned on, and he would have been redirected, and it might have been seen as misbehavior. But then the children who were watching started to give him ideas like pull your foot or move your head. Um, and he got pretty close to getting all the way in there when he backed himself in, kind of butt first, and then balled himself up and grabbed his feet with his hands and pulled them in. And then he got out and the other children were trying, and they could use the experience they had from watching Warren try
Mhm.
this to guide their own problem solving. And
Mhm.
it was just really kind of a wonderful thing to see that might have been stopped by an adult idea that that's not what we do with the shelves, or that's not safe, or um, stop showing off just because we have someone observing, or a teacher who felt pressured because there was someone observing and felt like they needed to control things better. Maybe another teacher would have stopped it because I was there. And so this story is in the book because what I'm doing with the schema specific chapters is taking just a moment of free play that maybe seems a little weird, maybe looks a little meaningless, might be seen as misbehavior in another context or from another person's view. And then outlining, here's the social value of it. Here's the emotional value, math, science, reading, brain development stuff, and really breaking it down so that we can look at these moments of child-led, child-chosen play and say, um, one, yay for him for getting to play, but also, okay, how could I use this to talk to a skeptic,
Mhm.
and persuade a skeptic that that there was the potential for a
Value.
lot of learning in
Uh-huh.
this, snippet of the day where Warren's trying to crawl into a shelf.
I think sometimes we're so scripted in what materials can be in what place and what the materials are used for,
Yeah,
that even when children are not endangering another child, which Warren certainly wasn't,
no,
and the beauty of the Vygotsky that was happening there with the zone of proximal development, where kids
yeah,
were helping him try to figure out how to get
yeah,
in, and then they modeled what he did when he finally got in and tried
yeah,
their own things. I mean, the beauty and the intentional ways that he was problem solving. Okay, that didn't work. He didn't give up after the
hmm
first or second try.
hmm
He had
yeah,
persistence. He
yeah,
was trying problem solving. He was critically thinking that, okay, that position didn't work. Let me try this one.
yeah,
The social interaction he was having with his peers who were offering him suggestions, and they were problem solving and saying, oh, you need to try this or this. Oh my goodness. And recognizing that, you know, typically, I don't know, I had toddlers that would want to climb into the sink of the little housekeeping thing
yes.
all the
Especially if you
time.
can pull the tub out and get into
Yeah.
that little hole that's
Oh my
left.
God, they just loved it. And, people
Yeah,
would say, oh, they're going to pinch their fingers. Oh, they're going to, and I'd say, leave them
yeah,
alone. This is where they are.
yeah,
This is what their body is telling them they need today.
yeah,
So I think because we're, you can't, oh, heaven forbid, moving the dishes from housekeeping into the sensory table.
yeah,
Um, because we're rigid in those center boundaries and children don't see the boundaries.
right,
I think we miss a lot of opportunities for development
right.
just because
Or
people
even,
understand that schema.
right, like what is a shelf for? I'm an adult, so the shelf is for holding the things. In this case, the space he was trying to climb into was the storage space for the little vinyl circles that the kids sat on during circle time.
Mhm.
So he also had, navigated, they were in there while he was doing all of this and it was slippery, but a teacher who isn't isn't curious or hasn't learned to be curious or has never been presented with any other view might look at that and say, yeah, it's not safe. You might bump your head, or you might, or the shelf might fall over. Well, if you've got a shelf that's going to fall over that easily, it shouldn't be freestanding in the middle of
Be
your
there.
room anyway. Um,
Exactly.
but what I hope that stories like this invite people to do is to just practice that curiosity before you stop. Like, okay, I'm going to watch for a while and find out what's really going on. But it's so interesting that you brought up Vygotsky, because it's another shift, right? We think sometimes only the adult can be the more knowledgeable other. Only the adult can provide that scaffolding, or scaffolding has to happen in a
Inten-
planned way,
intentional. Yeah.
intentional, and only, led by the adult and as direct instruction. I think we sometimes use scaffolding as a euphemism for direct instruction.
Yes.
We're so
I
good at that.
mhm.
But in this case, Warren, who maybe is a child who gets called out a lot, suddenly is a leader, and suddenly he's that more knowledgeable other, and he's showing them with his body, because that's how they learn, right? Is through their bodies before they have abstract concepts kind of figured out. He's using his body to do all of that. And uh so if we can slap that Vygotsky theory onto this bit of play that we're watching, that was completely child-led and shifts us away from another script,
Mhm.
but also lends some validation. Oh, it's a theory. Oh, it's Vygotsky.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh,
For those who need that. Yeah.
yes, for the people who need it, who might say, well, why are you letting him do that? And you can say,
Yeah.
I want you to watch the interaction. Let me do even, I mean, as a teacher, I would have been over there with a notepad and note paper doing language samples of what all the problem solving
All the ideas they were
that
sharing.
they were coming up with, because that
Yeah.
is amazing
Yeah.
skills that children were able to contribute.
Yeah.
And think of the language that was happening, the development as well as the support
Yeah.
in building that relationship with
Yeah. And there's a lot of math value here too, and it's another shift
mm,
that we can make as teachers. Instead of just thinking about arithmetic, numbers and addition and subtraction, those kinds of things. If we're thinking more broadly about mathematics, which is so much more open than just the numbers and the
yeah, just
counting or
think of the
whatever.
spatial stuff.
Well, that's
Yeah.
what he's learning about math concepts like size and shape and direction. But he's doing it with his body instead of sitting still in an activity where we're maybe doing a math, some sort of worksheet, or even if it's not a worksheet, it could even be sort of playful, but still adult led, with these scripted
See,
math outcomes that we're looking for, instead of thinking um, about how important it is for children to be able to use their body, to first experience concepts that way, physically, concretely, because their brains aren't ready for that abstract
right.
idea yet. And I think once you can start pinning math language or science language or literacy to play, you become more willing to allow it, because it's a little bit, you're not quite, I think even teachers who already are sort of bought into play still really struggle with, what do other people think of what I'm doing? Of what if someone walked in right now? I don't know how to explain this. I just know they should play. But the reality is we always have to explain it to somebody. We
Right.
always have to make the case for play. So we have to be able to think about it in these ways, and then we become more comfortable allowing it if we can say, oh yeah, I definitely see that there's some STEM here, or there's um, literacy here.
And if we can take that experience and just say today, the children practice their vocabulary, problem solving, and critical thinking, as well as their spatial awareness and um, size and measurement
Uh-huh.
uh, in during our time where they direct their own learning,
Yeah.
and you have time at nap time to then find all those math, science approaches to learning, literacy, social studies, social
Yeah.
and emotional development
Yeah.
that go with them. And
Yeah.
in how many minutes? I mean, how many minutes was that?
Right. Well, it's, I think the other thing is people think, well, if we're just playing, um, how do I make sure every child meets all the standards? And that's
Yeah.
another thing we have to move away from.
Mhm.
And they think if I'm not in control and I haven't planned it, I can't know what each child is learning. Well, we can't know that even when we're leading a group, even
Right.
when it's adult led, like that. We just don't ever know for sure what children might be learning from our plan. And so I think it might be eventually anyway for some folks easier to just
Mhm.
look at these because this was 5 minutes or
5 minutes.
5 minutes of the day. And if I have 23-year-olds in a group, which this classroom did, I can watch each child's play if there's
Mhm.
enough time scheduled for them to play, right? So if we feel that pressure that, well, I have to know what every child is working on or what every child is doing, I have to be able to justify what I'm doing, according to whatever standards I'm using. We can do that
You can do it.
authentically, like we're not being, and I think families for sure, and maybe other stakeholders are going to enjoy hearing about Warren trying to crawl into a shelf. They're going to think it's a little bit funny, maybe.
Mhm.
And then they're engaged, just like a child who's having a joyful experience is more engaged with the ideas they're working on. An adult who's feeling a little joy as we share a story about play, and then also include the
Mhm.
benefit, the academic benefit or the social and emotional benefit, whatever it is, that's going to be a more engaging conversation and it's going to stay with them longer, I think.
Well, and I think if they have an example of that scenario and everything that
Mhm.
took place, they
Mhm.
may have a better understanding of observing
Right.
at
Yeah.
home, even.
Yeah.
And if you think about everything that Warren and his peers did in 5 minutes across every domain of development, pretty
Yeah.
much,
Yeah.
based on that description, and and then we recognize that maybe when we're sitting down with them doing a teacher planned hands-on activity, are they really engaged? Is it just math we're working on? Think of the integration that took
Hmm.
place, which was in an authentic, natural, child-led
Yeah.
experience.
Well, and I think it was Nancy Carlson Page in her Taking Back Childhood book who
Mhm.
said something like only the most narrow of like learning standards can actually be measured and seen. Like only the most narrow bit of the math concepts can
Mhm.
actually be done in an activity like that. But in something the child has chosen and has time to explore and build out and go back to, that is a much broader experience, but it's more difficult for adults to notice if we're not being intentional about it, right? So um that's why I think, I mean, that's really one of the whole purposes for this behind this book is to say, here's a framework that lets you be curious about children rather than looking at this overwhelming whole group of all the children playing at once and trying to decide what's happening. I spend 10 minutes watching Warren and I have this framework where I can say, oh, I can see that he's enclosing and enveloping. And then I'm curious about what that might mean. And I'm curious about what he might be learning. Then I have to stretch myself a little bit too. Like I just think it's a deeper way of being in the work with children and a more authentic way of thinking about what they're learning, what they
Mhm.
could be learning, what might be
And
happening.
really a tangible way
Yeah,
to be able to document what they're learning, right?
right.
Too. So it's not like it's, oh, I'm going to observe for, today. I mean, some of these things are just happen, right?
Yeah,
So you it was really funny, Stacy Binge, and so now I'm getting more and more where I want to go into every child development program and put blank paper and crayons in it.
everywhere. Yeah.
And then I want to do the Bev Boss thing where she had clipboards where, how
Mhm.
does your story start? only for teachers who see these moments, which are happening all the
all the
time
time. Yeah.
when children are able to direct their own learning,
Yeah.
but to be able to capture just that story,
Yeah.
that narrative, and
Yeah.
as a way of demonstrating the value of when children are directing their own play instead of the
Yeah.
leading it.
Yeah, I think, I think that connects too to assessment expectations that are put on teachers,
Hmm?
observing and noticing what children are learning or know how to do or still are working on. This is so much more authentic than if I
Mhm.
had sat down with Warren and gone through the whatever the different readiness checklists are, or even kept notes for a week about, I just think if we get in this habit of always looking,
Mhm.
and especially during free play times, most of the time what I see is the adults checking out during that time.
Oh yeah,
And whether it's outside or inside, seeing that as
a
not
break.
as much, like they're not as needed during that. They're
Mhm.
needed differently. Their noticing is needed and their permission, I guess, is needed. But like one of the things I have to read this piece because one of the things I write about with Warren is I looked at the Indiana Early Learning Standards for science for a child his age, or no, for kindergarten, for the kindergarten readiness, or for the kindergarten standard. And it said that by the end of kindergarten, he should be able to ask questions, make observations, and gather information about a situation people want to change to define a simple problem that can be solved through the development of a new or improved object or tool. And he's doing all of those things, right? His question is, can my body fit in this space?
Mhm.
He makes observations about what works and what doesn't, and he gathers that information and he's practicing the short-term memory stuff that you need to get through that. Um, what else here? The tool in this case, because the standard says using tools, in this case, the tool is his body.
Body.
And
Yeah,
what a fun way to think about watching a kid trying to crawl into a shelf.
I
For
know.
me anyway. And it just also how much more competent do I see Warren as when I
Mhm.
can say, he's using his body, but he's still practicing with ideas. Um, it's hard for me because I'm not in charge of it. And if I'm not in charge, how am I a teacher?
Mhm.
Um, but
People will think, the parents will say, all they do is play.
right?
But when you are able to document that, I mean, a photo of
Yeah.
Warren trying to fit himself
Yeah.
in, the steps that Warren went through, the the peer interaction and support,
Uh-huh.
uh, ability. I mean, the next day
Yeah.
I would have gone to the grocery store and gotten lots of boxes, and just
Yes. Yeah.
and put boxes out.
Yeah.
This is where we are.
Yeah.
Let's give them additional
Uh-huh.
tools to use to see what happens. They may do
Right.
nothing with them. I would think,
Right.
they're really interested in that. I'm going to go home and I've got stuff in my closet that I can bring in. The next day they weren't interested at all because again,
Hmm.
it's based on where they are, right?
Right.
So, but oh
Right.
my goodness, the
Yeah.
amazing story of Warren. I can't wait to read this book because I mean it is so descriptive
Yeah.
in helping people see the learning that takes place when, and I hate to call it learning, but see the development that takes place.
Yeah. Well, and I think I know that's a big part of the conversation I'm trying to have with the book too, is we have to change. We also have to, I guess, reflect on um, the difference between teaching and learning and development.
Mhm.
And when we only talk about teaching, the focus is on me. I'm performing, right? I'm going through my schedule and I'm planning all the things, and then I am leading all the things. And that's when the important stuff happens. Um, and that's a stressful way to go through work when go through your day every day when you've got children who don't fit that mold,
And it's
who
so
aren't ready for
pressure
that
of
model
you.
yet. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you feel
It's
like everything's on your shoulders. And when we can switch to, I'm not as uncomfortable with learning as I am with teaching. The idea of, again, I'm not saying that I know exactly what Warren was learning. but
Right.
I have an idea of the kinds of things he might have been learning, and how that impacts his development.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I want to be clear that the reason that I, like I said, for Warren's story, that chapter will also talk about how that impacted his social development and how that might have impacted his emotional development. And then those three content areas, math, science, literacy, and then brain development, because those are the audiences we have to change, we have to persuade, right?
We have to
We have to,
persuade.
if we're gonna change a skeptic's mind about play or embolden someone who wants to believe it but feels sort of timid about it, we have to figure out what the value of those other audience, what's the value held by the skeptic. And if their value is social emotional learning so that their classroom runs more smoothly or whatever, then I have to use that language when I'm talking about play. And if
Mm-hmm.
their value is readiness for school, then I
Mm-hmm.
have to use that language when I talk about play. If it was just me, we'd just be playing because
Right.
children have a right to play, right? You know that,
Right.
you too. But the reality is there are skeptics, and we
Mm-hmm.
have to be able to figure out how to connect to their value, if we want to open up more free play for young
Yeah,
children.
we do. We have to meet them where they are, right? So,
Yeah, yeah. Just
um,
like we say we have to do with children, we have to do it with
yes,
our
yeah,
advocacy audiences too.
absolutely. One of the things that I did in a session that I have done many times everywhere is lost opportunities, how teaching interferes with learning,
Yes, yeah.
right?
Or
And
just prevents it.
yeah, exactly. And we get to that because there's toward the end of the session, I asked them to tell me, describe a classroom where teachers teach and what does it look like and what are you seeing? And describe a classroom where children learn and
Mm-hmm.
what does it look like and what are you seeing? And
Yeah,
that's when they kind of go, oh, oh,
yeah,
so
yeah.
it's a valuable way to frame it so that people can get the difference between someone who's teaching and someone who's creating an environment and experiences
Right.
through play that children
Yeah,
can.
and you're really more of a teacher if we're talking about being a teacher in terms of supporting children's learning or setting up, moving them however you want to talk about it. You're actually a more effective teacher when children are playing and you're noticing what they're playing and you're curious about how to support that or provide more of it, or like you said, bringing in, they want to crawl into things. What else can I do to give them an opportunity to crawl into it? And understanding that repetition is so important to brain development. That's where we're professionals, right? When we understand what children really need, and we do that best by watching them.
Mhm.
And then we think about how do I support or provide for this, or even just give more permission, be more explicit in my permission to the children that it's okay to
I
do
actually
those
think the
things.
next day with the boxes, I brought in tablecloths or sheets that went over the
To
table
put
so
over the
they could go.
tables. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and how many taboos are we breaking there? They're
Oh,
crawling in shelves, they're going under tables.
uh-huh.
Um, uh, maybe they're taking things from one interest area to another because they want to pursue these ideas.
Mhm.
Um, and so then, I think, we're so worried about, does someone see me as a professional and as a teacher? So I have to have more control and I have to have more rules. So it seems like I'm, fit that mental model of teacher. And
Mhm.
in the process, we stop so much learning, or
Yeah.
because they don't get to crawl under the table and experience how that's different from crawling into the shelf,
Mhm.
or how much darker it is when the tablecloth covers the table and you're under there suddenly. And or I have this idea, but I need to take this wooden block from the block area over into the dramatic play area. We're
Mhm.
stopping so much learning in our attempt to be seen as teachers.
I know.
Um,
And you would be so much happier if
yeah,
you
I
didn't
do
have
think that.
pressure on
Yeah,
yourself, right?
yeah,
We wouldn't have teachers leaving the field
yeah,
if they could watch the magic of development. I mean, you feel so validated
yep,
and so engaged in where that child was when they walked into your classroom and how much that child has developed, not because you've been teaching, but
yeah,
because they've been playing.
right.
And so, I think those that is going to help us, conversations like this, and definitely the book, is going to help us sort of shift people's thinking. Debbie Ray
Mhm.
and Laura and I were talking earlier about, the fourth grade reading scores, and everybody's freaking out about the
Right.
fourth grade reading scores. And the answer is not to lengthen the school year and to lengthen the school day and do more direct instruction. Like,
Mhm.
that's
We've been
not
trying that for decades and it's not
decade.
working.
It is
Yeah,
not working. And
yeah,
so it's time to rethink and to go back and refamiliarize ourselves with how children actually
yeah,
develop.
right. Yes, exactly. Um, and this is sort of off topic, but on along the lines of what you were just discussing, part of that pressure is because we say, um, before third grade, children are learning to read, and after third grade, they're reading to learn. So it's really important that they have this third grade reading level, because everything after that, they're going to be expected to learn by reading. Why don't we just change the way we teach?
Yes. Hello.
So I guess it's the same thing, just at an older age range, but we're just so unwilling to change anything about ourselves or our systems
Mhm.
because we don't understand development
And
enough,
that is it.
or because we feel that pressure and we don't feel comfortable talking about development
Well, it was really interesting in the
enough.
last conversation that we had this morning before you came on. I said to people, they may tell you to do something that's harmful to children, and they may give you something that they want you to use that is not going to promote their
Mhm.
development.
Mhm.
It doesn't mean you have to use it,
Yeah.
right?
Above all else, do no harm.
Yes. And you can, if you document those conversations and the interaction, like with Warren, and you say, here's what was taking place, here's the standards that they met
Mhm.
in 5 minutes. It
Yeah.
was this integrated, socially enriching, language enriching, problem
Mhm.
solving, mathematical and science
Mhm.
experiment
Yeah.
that was child initiated, then people will say, oh, well, what else do they do? And
Exactly.
you can do, you can
Mhm.
you can be the advocate for play.
Yeah.
You don't have to do those things that they're
Mhm.
telling you. It's not going to put a bruise on a child, but it's going to harm their curiosity.
Yeah.
So we have to really, we have to be brave. I,
Yes.
I think we need to get some
Yes.
bravery back in
Hmm.
and begin to push back a little.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you don't have to say it. You can nod your head and then close the door to your classroom and do what you know is right.
Yes. Yeah. I just, if there's something we believe in, but we're not confident enough in defending or articulating,
Mhm.
then that's on us. We
Mhm.
need to learn more, or talk to more people, or find a community of like-minded folks who can support each other
Mhm.
in those, and develop your skill um, of making that the value of play visible
Visible,
to
yes.
people who don't see it yet.
Making play visible
Yeah.
is probably the biggest gift you can give to families who are freaking out because their
Right? They're going to be
children
less stressed. Yeah.
aren't going to be ready.
Yeah.
And you, who's not trying to micromanage every moment of the day with a group of children who outnumber you, and recognizing that what one child is learning in play may be totally different than what another child is learning.
And that's okay.
And that is
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
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 It's all of these little, I want people to get back to loving what they do
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
reducing your anxiety and stress and reducing the number of people who leave because they just can't do it anymore because the expectations are crazy. I think there was something about that someone just put up on Facebook, and I think it was on the IPA USA one, that was talking about, the unrealistic expectations that teachers have, right? They have no control over what happens to that child, what that child's nutrition has been, what that child's prenatal experiences were like, what that child's experiences in trauma or abuse have been, what that child's food insecurity may or may not have been, what that child's health conditions and whether they had access to health care. All of those things are impacting the child's ability to develop in a typical way, right? And teachers should not be responsible for that, right?
Can't be. Yeah.
Responsible for where the child was when they walked in the door and where the child was when they left. And you don't find that out by testing. It just happens.
Yeah.
So, but it was really interesting. They said something about teachers, it was really about the fourth grade reading scores, that teachers aren't doing their job and blah, 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 and blah, 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 blah. And what teachers are really doing and what teachers are trying to make happen in a classroom that may not have any materials, where children are limited on the amount of food that they can be provided, where and that teachers are willing to take a bullet for their children. And that was like, oh
yeah. We expect an awful lot of teachers, and we expect, and so then that gets pushed down into increased, inappropriate, stressful expectations on the shoulders of 3-year-olds, right? Or 2-year-olds or whatever. And it all comes from the system that isn't working and needs to be
fixed. We need to blow it up and start all over and go back to what we know works. I mean, think about the 50s and 60s and 70s. People always want to go back to 1950s when women were home, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we need to forget that one. And we need to go back to the 1950s when children were playing outside, at home, in the neighborhood.
Yeah.
Because that's what is effective in helping them grow and develop in a healthy way. Oh my goodness. Well, this has been wonderful.
It's always hard to stop.
It's like
when you and I start talking. Yeah. It's a good way to spend my midday on a Monday. Yeah.
Oh, just to think about those things. And Warren's story, and I know there'll be many more, but Warren's story is really helps people see that, makes that learning visible, right? Because here is what was going on and how effective it was for 5 minutes to let Warren take the lead.
Yeah.
Instead of the teacher taking the lead, and that we need more of that.
Yeah.
I think that's it. I think that's what we do. Play is it, people.
Yep. I think you're right.
And the definition is it's play that's child initiated, not teacher directed. So we have to just get over the box that people think we should be in.
Yeah.
And think outside that box again.
Yeah.
We need to do it. Let's do it. We can do it. All right, stay right there while I close this out. So to learn more about IPA USA, please visit our website at ipausa.org. And until next time, keep